Shadow of the Colossus came out in 2005 and I was 25. Yeah, want to share one of my more pleasant gaming memories. Back then, I used to live in a fairly recognisable London. I actually lived in Brixton. I lived on a road called Stansfield Road. If you look at it on Google, apparently David Bowie lived on or near that street. I shared a house, a 3-story house with 7 other people. None of us were loaded enough to have a decent sized TV in our rooms. There was a communal TV downstairs in the lounge. That was where my silver PlayStation PS2 would sit. And I would play Shadow of the Colossus quite late at night, not to disturb anybody. Few people would come in, have a look. It was standard stuff. One time I came quite late back from work and you have to go past the lounge to get upstairs to your room, and I heard all this commotion and sort of familiar noises, so I gingerly poked my head round the door. Every one of the housemates is sat in front of the game, completely enthralled and having a go at that first boss. I was beaming for days and we all finished it together. It was an incredible thing, and it's very much worth watching as well as playing. I am CouchQ, by the way. I don't normally open with an old man anecdote. They all also got individually bollocked for touching my PlayStation without me in attendance, but that's a story for another time. Okay, we have to talk about something quite serious and self-indulgent now. It's been a year since I've uploaded a video that includes copywritten music or content, and the piece I've chosen for my intro is from quite a recent animated film called Flow. It sort of hit me so hard, and the visions of the game aligned in my head so vividly that I just have to use it. This means that I can't earn from the video, which isn't a huge one. I'm just worried about it sort of tainting the channel with the algorithm, if you're with me. The last one was an Anthem wrestling meme, and that was just too spicy to not upload. Just don't include the intro. Take the money and give your audience a sort of mediocre experience. Very funny. Okay, without any further ado, I think that old man anecdote got rid of a lot of the normies and tourists. I'll see you on the other side of this. Let's talk about Team Ico and Ico first of all, from 2001. It turned out to be massive and it gave that studio the solid financial ground, and of course Sony got involved for the next game, which was going to be Shadow of the Colossus. Now the hype for Shadow of the Colossus was pretty unreal, and I got to Ico after playing Shadow, so it was a bit back to front, embarrassingly. Nice and confusing calling the studio Team Ico and the first game being Ico. Now they have semi-disbanded and we're going to get to it at the end. They have something new coming out. They're under a different name. I am quite excited about it. I've shot this whole video in quality mode, so just to be sure everyone's up to speed, this is a remake of that original game. It was done by Bluepoint and this was released in 2018, and up against Wipeout the Amiga collection as a semi-remake remaster. These two games are the gems of those systems. Absolute gems. They're must own. There is no 9th gen SSD patch. This thing sits on your hard drive still. Loading times are not terrible, and I'm quite impressed with the boost. We saw a pro boost with this game, but there's no real official PlayStation 5 patch, but there is some passive backward compatibility. For a quality mode, this is a freaking good pan for 2018, and the camera has its own mind. I literally mean that. You cannot really take over and get every frame looking how you want it. You're wrestling with it constantly. If you get to the 6 o'clock mark, i.e. behind you, it then moves you over to the right hand side of the screen. Think when you click in the stick on an over the shoulder shooter for it to change which side of the screen the character is. These woodlands, they still wow me, and they do actually look incredible. The water's quite interactive. It was a game that was wanting to be adored visually, and they totally got to that mark with this remake. Awesome little Last Guardian Easter egg put in there by the remakers. Obviously that came out after the original game. What is it that makes this game so beloved and popular? I think it's embedded in its model, and what it actually is. It's essentially 16 boss fights. This is quite a lot in common with maybe a game like Monster Hunt, where the creatures are the star of the show. There is some traversal, you do a bit of platforming, but they've embedded that into scaling the monsters and bosses themselves. You saw some of this in God of War games, and that also reminds me about the game's performance back on that PlayStation 2. It was relatively near the end of the life cycle of the system, and I remember it being one of the more beefier graphical games on that platform. Secondly, I think another reason why it's also pretty famous is that the integration with this horse and the main character, their relationship is awesome. The animation was market leading at the time, and the way you call it in, the way it's used in the fights with the monsters, you can move at high speed, you can fire off the back of it, you can even stand on it. You see this stuff in Assassin's Creed games all the time now. And I think thirdly, it's storytelling with the imagery and lack of detailed, massive, lengthy dialogue. It says what it needs to with really cool, striking scenes within the game. And if you finished it, you'll know how wraparound that whole story is. We've also got some awesome meta with shooting the tails off the lizards, something I didn't clock when I first played the game. I got quite into that. We're going to do just the one boss fight in this video. I chose number 9. It's kind of midway, it's quite dramatic. I love the idea of its location and the look of it. It also integrates the horse pretty well, and I feel that's some of the more exhilarating areas of the combat. I think everybody's got their favourite creature within the game. The flyer is just unbelievably good, and we also have a flying sand monster, which I think could be peak. But that is leaning on spoiler territory. The designers of the monsters have struck this amazing middle ground between derpy, terrifying, and mythical. And when we look at their newest trailer, you'll see a direct connection with the look of the creature. They're all taken down by their own little quirky technique. It's cool. You might have to use the bow, use the sword. There is a lot of environment involvement. Often a clue is how the layout of the arena is that you're fighting this thing in. I think also the idea of unlimited arrows sort of also frees up that inhibition when you're shooting at the monsters themselves. I spoke a little bit about this with Sekiro and how they've taken a lot of the fuss off the UI, so you can really just get into what's going on screen. And talking of user interface, Shadow of the Colossus rarely has any on-screen at all. And you might be thinking, why aren't you sat in that photo mode with those boring pan in and outs? The whole goddamn game's a photo mode. Talking of sort of stripped down mechanics and minimal UI, there is sections in the game where it's well important to be looking at what's going on with meters and gauges, and that's when you have to cling on to the monster. And I feel this is also being pushed and integrated in some other boss fights in other games, particularly the mount mechanic in Monster Hunter World of all things. Ghosts of Tsushima Back of Force Combat is only just as good as this. Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey, you just feel right at home. But when you get this on, you're like, wow, this mechanic was done seriously well in the first place with Shadow of the Colossus. So what the hell happened with The Last Guardian? If you want my honest opinion with it, I don't actually think the game is horrendously weak. It's just that Shadow of the Colossus happens to be one of the strongest 6th generation system games ever made. And when it came to the model for The Last Guardian, I think they were trying to get a bit of that Ico goodness in there, with having to look after the main character as a vulnerable asset and then having the creature as the puzzle solving muscle of the game. The two were quite confusing to some people, but I don't dislike the game, and I've also put some content out about it I will link. Let's have a quick look at that Project Robot trailer that we saw at the Game Awards. So the key members are called Gen Design now, and they've launched this. It does, as mentioned, talking about that robot look, have some massive parallels with what we've seen in Shadow of the Colossus, and I'm actually genuinely quite excited about this.
55 seconds. 50 seconds.
I have been taught this last decade not to expect anything good from anything that was good. You need to just wait until release day. But there's no harm in enjoying hearing from these developers and getting to see that they're working on something new, because I miss that quality from Team Ico. So just fingers crossed on everything with Project Robot.
20 seconds.
Would you buy an upscaled 9th gen official version PlayStation 5 of Shadow of the Colossus? I certainly would. I think Bluepoint should be allowed to do it. Same thing goes with Bloodborne. They have sat on that one for way too long. Thank you very much for giving me that colossal view time. I was, of course, Couch Coop. Black Myth Wu Long King Kong on the way. Can you say that again without sounding like a racist? Black Myth Wukong. I can say it. I can speak. I will, of course, see you down there.